Today's lecture concerns Dreama Moon's white enculturation and Angela Davis's obsolescence of housework, and how those two pieces and the arguments internal to them deal with our more general arguments for self-determination and what self-determination entails in our institutional relationships. All right, so we've considered before how self-determination requires interactions with other free beings in the world, and everything that you do is determined by the fixed nature of whatever you're interacting with. That's why if you are going to be free, the thing you are interacting with has to be free, and explains why there's a hard limit to the kinds of relations and the kinds of determinations I can give myself if I can only interact with a rock or a chair or a tiger. Since there is a hard limit to the kinds of interactions that I can have with these natural objects, there's going to be a limit to the kinds of determinations I can give myself relative to those natural objects. For example, I can't be a tennis player. I can't actualize myself as a tennis player if my only tennis partner is a tiger, because tigers don't play tennis. And for me to actually be a tennis player, to realize myself as a tennis player, I need someone who's going to play tennis with me. And in this way, I don't get to determine myself to be what I want to be, because the tiger simply is what it is. So what does this have to do with housework? The things we consider housework, cleaning, cooking, and childcare, are fixed by nature. They have to be done. But for our interactions with the mop to be free, that means the mess would have to be free, but the mess is fixed. So we have to do what we have to do to get rid of the mess. Right? So in doing housework, we're interacting with something that is fixed. It's not a creative endeavor. It's not a self-determining endeavor. We are determined by the fact of the mess or the need for eating, right? Our biological nature, which is not a matter of self-determination, right? So, and this is not a matter of our will. So even if the work has to be done, it's necessarily going to be unfulfilling because it is not the work of self-determination. And look, I know you're thinking, well, my mom likes to cook, and I love kids. Yeah, but even if you like to cook, clean, or watch 3-year-olds, you don't want to have to do it on nature's schedule, right? You don't want to have to do it every day incessantly. Even people who love to cook don't want to cook Monday, like every day, 3 meals because they have to, right? You want to cook because maybe you have this recipe that you want to try out, or you enjoy it as a relief, but not on a schedule because you have demanding 5-year-olds who only eat mac and cheese. All right. So there are 2 issues at play. A lot of this housework is off the market, and in a market-based society, it's not even considered work. And that's what Davis talks about. But the big issue, and since it's off the market, we have to take this issue seriously, is why is it so primitive? Why is this work so primitive? And in a market-based society, we've let markets drive innovation, right? So the work has stayed primitive for a few kind of dicey reasons that Davis, I think, does a pretty good job detailing. And housework is necessary, but it's uncreative because you're dealing with the fixed nature of the mess or the fact of animals having to eat. But it's uncreative. So what have we done with other necessary but uncreative things? We've socialized them, subsidized them, and industrialized, and more importantly, and the most importantly, we've industrialized them. For example, meals. How much easier would it be if everyone had a voucher, and with this voucher would pay for 80% of a private chef who would deliver meals for 6 families in the neighborhood? And you're thinking, why would that be better? Look, I don't know if you've done industrial cooking, but if you're in an industrial kitchen with all of the infrastructure and the knives and everything, bigger pots, cooking for 9 or 10 and cooking for 69 or 70, there's a difference, but not that much. After about 8 or 9, we're just talking about more potatoes and more tomatoes and more cans. And so it's not 10 times the work to cook for 70 as it is to cook for 7. It's, 1.5 and 2 times the work. If you have the infrastructure, right? It's more chopping. But it doesn't take 6 times the effort. And That means a chef could deliver these meals with leftovers to all the families, and all the families would have to do is find 5 other families that all share the same dietary preferences. And this way, everybody gets the equivalent of a home-cooked meal, and you don't have to worry about the salt or the shortcuts that are driven by a profit motive, finding shortcuts and little additives and addictive substances, screwing up your, quality of the food. Right, so that would be kind of a conception of industrialized meal prep. But remember, it used to be the case that people took their trash to the heap themselves or burned it themselves as a matter of personal responsibility. But now we've industrialized it, and it's better. We have professional sanitation workers who go from house to house and, gather your trash. And that's a better way to live. It actually enables us to be freedom, and it's sponsored by the state. So would house cleaners be that much different? An efficient team of 3 unionized, well-paid people going from house to house once a week. That, Davis says actually that would be better. It would be actually an institution of freedom, right? Davis argues that an efficient team of well-compensated cleaning experts, you tax, and then this is where we put tax money to, going from house to house, would be a form of industrializing labor that is fundamentally unfulfilling, right? Sometimes you like to clean, but you don't want, especially if you have kids, there's always mess. There's always more laundry. I suspect, I have 3 kids, but I suspect that after 5 or 6, you could always be doing laundry. Just always be just laundry. The laundry could always be going, right? And it's going to be unfulfilling and that's fixed by the kid's mess. It's not an interaction of mutual willing that I decide to do laundry because we're both emancipated from our nature, and so we decide to do this activity. It's not going to be the case. Laundry is something that has to be done. And if you don't know, laundry is a huge time suck. Before the automated washing machine, laundry could take 30 hours a week, man. The process of it, and if it's really primitive. So we need to further industrialize housework in a way that's serious and takes it seriously as a something that's necessary for self-determination, the socialization and industrialization of housework. All right, so I suspect you have all sorts of feelings about this. And, I don't know, sit down with your parents, have them watch this video. And she says even the strategy of just making sure that each spouse does 50% of the work, that doesn't change the fact of it being primitive. We need to industrialize it, socialize it, and subsidize it with professionals and as a matter of freedom, right? So sit with your parents in front of this video, have them read it, have them read the Davis article, talk about it over quarantine. I don't know. And now we're going to talk about the Dreama moon. Now, the Dreama moon, it's tricky because I've never taught this virtually. And I'll tell you the truth, sometimes white people have a hard time seeing that whiteness is an ethnicity, not a pigmentation. It's an actual cultural artifact that we've made and reproduced and institutionalized. And you're just going to have to get over that first step on your own because I can't really hold your hands through it over the internet. But just think of whiteness not as pigmentation, but as a culture. You could go make the harder argument that it's an anti-colonial culture. It's a colonial culture that needs blackness in order, because people in Europe didn't become white till they came to the United States. And the Irish were Irish, and then they were white when they got here and started treating black people like garbage. So, and having common cause with other Catholics and Protestants. So whiteness is a cultural artifact. It's a thing. It's an ethnicity. And you're just going to have to take that step with me over the internet. And so we're going to go through what Moon has to say about it. And so we spoke about how, in this class, we've spoken about how all of our relationships occur between free persons. They have to occur under pre-existing institutions. Right? Because if I'm dealing with a free person, that person can do anything to me. And so that's how I know these pre-existing institutions are how I know strangers just won't come up to you and knife you just because. Right, now, Moon suggests that the family is where brute animals are institutionalized into people. It's also where white people learn how to treat people, including all the lies we tell other people about how we treat people. That's where you learn to lie. That's where you learn manners. For better or for worse, that's where we learn it, in the family. Right? So that's where white people learn how to white. And this is Moon's argument. I think it's actually a pretty good argument. And she does the inverse, that non-white people, and especially black people, she did some interviews, and it turns out the family is where they get a respite from whiteness. Because you have to understand, so with Moon's conceptions, you learn whiteness in the family, and then it starts to infect all major institutions outside of the family. And so everybody who's non-white still has to participate in institutions governed by the norms of whiteness. And so they get a rest from those institutions when they go to their family. That's when they can actually not be on white people's terms, right? So your family is where you learn how to respect the right people as people, and your family is also where you learn who to treat as mere tools, as mere means to your own end. But then it gets reinforced in other institutions and built in other institutions like schools and churches and the workplace. And there's a dark side. And remember, the dark side is that the home is where we learn whose butt to kiss and who to treat on the other side like they're disposable. Right? And so there are two incidents in Moon's piece that I think are really telling. One was the incident where the lady was in a business meeting and the boss made an awful comment and the lady spoke up and she did it, with courage, and all of her colleagues were quiet because they lacked courage. And at the end of the meeting, one of the colleagues kind of came up to her and thanked her, thank you for saying that. That was really nice that you said that. And the lady thought, I could have used you in the meeting. Why thanking me quietly after the fact doesn't help my job, doesn't help the standing, doesn't help the struggle. So you have to think about all of the institutions that teach us that it's okay not to stand up in public, as long as you give them your confidence in private. Someone had to teach the colleagues the structures of cowardice, insofar as it's okay that we not back the right person at the time, as long as we tell them privately afterwards. That has to be taught. That's a skill. That kind of cowardice needs to be practiced, and you need to watch other people, your parents or your other parishioners, that kind of hypocrisy and kind of way to conceive of responsible action is a skill, right? And that has been taught, and we have institutions that teach you to talk one way and do another way. And I'll tell you that black people take a lot of risks alone, only to be told later, including moi, well, what you did was really brave. Thank you. Could have used you at the time, man. Could have used you at the time. So Moon does a good job about talking about how the fear of being alienated from your family does a lot of work on policing the boundaries of whiteness, and does a lot of work on policing your behavior. So you find yourself doing dicey things, because if you revolt, for example, you tell your bumptious uncle to hush, your membership in the institution of your family is jeopardized. And that means jeopardizing your inheritance. That means jeopardizing a lot of the perks that come with, depending on who you talk to, whiteness, right? So are you willing, who teaches you not to jeopardize those perks for the sake of justice? That is a skill. And so you're dealing with that ideology, and that ideology is transmitted. For Moon, she sees it transmitted through the family and then kind of metastasizing from there and going to other institutions. But you have to think that all of these kind of habits of cowardice and courage, and what we think of as appropriate behavior, are taught to us and institutionalized. And maybe it's what does the family do in terms of that? And Moon thinks it's central. And also, the next step that Moon doesn't make, that means if you're going to dismantle that means we need to start talking about how we're going to dismantle the family. I'm just saying that's just the next step. And not just dismantling. There's this famous report called the Moynihan Report. It came out in the 70s about how the problem in America, the problem with black people is the black family. So it's like the Negro family as the case for renewal. It's a big influential report that says like, all of the problems in the hood have nothing to do with artifacts of white supremacy and terrorism. It's all to do with like black family structure. And very influential report. I don't agree with much of it. There's another report that came out a little bit earlier called the Kerner Commission. I think that's a little bit more on the nose, but that's fodder for another video in another class. Right. So another example Moon did, I think, a good job with is how some folks are given to confuse addressing the manners of racialized oppression with the realities of racialized oppression. Right. And this piece was written in 1989, but I think it's still relevant to the moment because we have to ask ourselves how much of the backlash against our current president, President Trump, is about his manners versus the reality of his policies. And what does that mean about us? Right? And how many of those people would be fine with the same policies if they were presented by someone who was more polished and more genteel? Right? So a lot of people have a problem with Trump because it can be said because, he uses he doesn't know how to use a salad fork, or like he's gauche or déclassé. They don't really have a problem with the policies. And that's a form of how manners and whiteness actually sustain oppression. Because if you find yourself being very, 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 very excited about manners and the appearance and not so much about the reality, it's because you're invested in the perks of having this certain reality. You just kind of want it covered with a better legitimizing myth. And, think about what you've learned in social dominance and the Davis kind of work with the moon and what you know about your life. And I know I said a lot and you might start bringing up all sorts of feelings, but this is the work, right? So thank you for your time and I will see you next week. Peace.